When I was 17 years old, I thought myself to be much wiser than people my age. This confidence and pride drove me to drop out of high school halfway through senior year. Some of my classmates worked part-time jobs to pay for books, food, dates, and whatever else people my age were interested in. Not me. While they all studied and spent their time working retail at their family-owned stores, I left home and applied for several jobs in the town I grew up in, Hamsville. Hamsville is west of Washington, D.C., and placed right in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. It started out as an old farming town, with most of its population working on and around the local area, participating in farming, lodging, and homesteading. Then the Civil War happened, and most of it was turned to ruin. Pigs were slaughtered to feed the advancing Union Army. The occupants retreated south, and the natives that were here so long before us built themselves some homes in the surrounding mountains. Seeing myself as a mountain man, as naive as I was back then, I had hoped to get a job with a local construction company, or better yet, a job with the local fire department. I quit shaving, and much to my dismay, never grew more than a cheap half stash and a few whiskers on my chin. As the days went on, and the realization that I'd be homeless set in, I found myself a job at a local farm, Alamedian Farm. Tired of going from place to place and sleeping at the residence of gracious families, I took the job as quickly as I could. You could call it desperation, but I thought it would be better than working at a small mom-and-pop shop like my peers. I had no idea the hell that was in store for me. I started there in January of 1894. It was cold, and snow covered the mountains surrounding the Shenandoah Valley. The lakes froze over, and people made do with what they had since supplies couldn't make it over the mountain from the larger cities to the east. Mrs. Goodson ran the farm, which at this point had been reduced to a few cows and 26 horses within the barn. I slept in a storage shed configured for living, right behind the barn, which was fine by me. I had access to a well, a fireplace, and I lived within a few hundred feet of where I worked. The first few days were spent learning the tasks, gathering firewood, and talking to the Goodson family, who would invite me to dinner in their house every so often. They were kind, and I was grateful to have such an opportunity. Things seemed just fine until one night, after I'd finished mucking stalls. I was leaned up against my living space, facing the woods that surrounded the area, smoking a cigarette. The silent night was serene. The snowfall was gentle, and the fireplace inside gave me some lighting through a window. I drew a deep breath and exhaled, feeling awfully good about my situation. Then, the sound of a rhythmic tapping came from somewhere in the woods. I let my cigarette fall to the ground and I listened, holding my breath to hear better. It started to sound an awful lot like the drums that I'd hear during football games. It would start with one real loud boom, followed by 3 lesser booms, before restarting the same 4-beat pattern. I drew my revolver from my hip and pulled the hammer back. It's always been said that you shouldn't whistle in the night here in the Appalachian Mountains. I didn't give a damn. I had a revolver. I whistled and listened. Silence. I squinted my eyes and bit my tongue in anticipation. The drumming stopped. Being the damned fool I was, I yelled out, "That's what I thought." I'd have fired my revolver, but I didn't want to stir the horses. The next morning, I woke up and followed my routine as usual, and the snow kept falling. As usual, I stepped outside my living space to smoke a cigarette, as every night. Instead of drums this time, I heard sticks cracking. I drew my revolver because mountain lions aren't something to be fooled with. The atmosphere was mostly dark, with the only light coming from the window right behind me. I heard something getting closer, and feeling the hair raise on the back of my neck. I fired 3 shots. Bang, bang, bang. With the final shot, I did my best to look into the woods, and to my horror, I saw what appeared to be a skull of a deer sitting upon the body of a large, stringy but muscular man. I stared and didn't breathe for at least 10 seconds. I hurried inside and sat in my bed facing the door. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I opened my eyes and it was daytime. Before I could stand up, something slammed into my door. "Get the hell out here, boy!" It was Mrs. Goodson. I opened the door. "For what reason did you find it necessary to fire off 3 rounds into the night, scaring my horses? You drinking?" I thought to myself of what had happened, and out of fear of sounding crazy, I lied and told her that I was drunk and fired my revolver for no reason. She scolded me, but as always, she still offered me coffee out of the kindness she always had for me. I did my duties as usual. Over the next few days, when I smoked my nightly cigarette, I'd always feel like I was being watched. After a few weeks of constant alertness at night, I brought a lantern with me one night while I smoked. Not only a lantern, but a rifle I used to kill deer growing up. As usual, I heard the rustling of branches and sticks, and feeling bold, I shouted into the dark night, "Get out of here, you goddamn fool!" The rustling stopped, and it was as if the entire forest had silenced itself for a second. There was not a sound, not even of snow falling. My heart began to race. I heard my blood pumping in my head. Then, to my horror, something responded through the silent dark. "Get out of here, you goddamn fool." I froze. As I heard my own voice shout at me from the dark, I froze. In my fear, I aimed my rifle into the darkness and pulled the trigger. Click. I swore at the rifle while it was jammed up, and the bolt was stuck so that I couldn't cycle another round. I dropped the rifle and drew my revolver. I fired all 6 shots and began stepping backwards as I chambered more bullets. I knocked my lantern off of the barrel it sat above, and a small flame began to fade on the ground. Out of the darkness came a figure of pure evil. The skull of a deer upon the wicked, contorted, bloodied body that made calculated movements toward me. Tears fell from my eyes as I stepped backwards faster. I aimed my revolver at its evil chest and fired 3 shots, which seemed to make the beast laugh. That's all I could hear. Laughter. Terrible, wicked laughter. It was as if the sound of the laughter came from all directions and resonated right in my brain. Not only laughter, but my own words. "Get out of here, you goddamn fool." My own voice. I turned and ran from the barn, kicking open the first stall which houses my pony, and pulled myself onto her back without a saddle. She ran up the aisle of other stalls, each containing a horse that shambled around in fear as the terrible laughing continued. "Come on, girl!" I shouted at my pony, and she ran with all of her might. And the laughter was just as loud as it ever was, as if it was right in my ear. She ran down the long dirt road, towards the wooden arches which displayed Alamedian Farm, and she kept running. The laughing only silenced when we were miles down the road. We came upon a few horse-drawn carriages and stopped just ahead of them. My face felt burnt from the snow and wind hitting my face, but I was glad to be away. They sat me in the back of the wagon, while the husband took a few steps around to check on my pony. As his wife struggled to console me, I could only choke out a short explanation that they couldn't understand. They gave me a bottle, and I drank, gulping down most of the sour whiskey it contained. I drifted to sleep, and as I looked out the back of the wagon, slowly rocked to sleep by the road. To my horror, I saw that same wicked deer skull.